Ndị be anyị ndewonu. Ọ bụ Ada Igbo na-ekwu na Igbo Media. N'Igbo Media, anyị na-ewetara unu ọtụtụ ozi gbasara ihe na-emegasị na Biafra land, n'ala Igbo na mba ndị ọzọ. N'ụbọchị nke taata, o nwere ihe bịara n'iru akwụkwọ anyị nke anyị ga-agụpụtara unu n'ụbọchị taa. Anyị gụpụtachaa ya, unu egee ya ka ọha n'uju. Ị ga-esie ya, ị drọpụọla your comment, like kwa this our video and gbasakwa ya ka o ruo ụmụnna anyị n'ebe dị iche iche arụ. This is according to Biafra activist wetara ya ozi n'ihu akwụkwọ, as he quotes, "Breaking news: Biafra freedom spreads across South Africa. Namibia agrees with AU on Biafra freedom. China adopts Biafra nation." Ya bụ ozi ka anyị ji bịa taata na Igbo Media. Ị ga-esie ya bụ ozi, gbaa mbọ gwa ihe i chere na comment section, ma mekwa ka ụmụnna anyị n'ebe dị iche iche ka ozi ya lute ha arụ. Ngwa gere ya ka ọ ha n'uju.
In silence as Nigeria held Nnamdi Kanu in indefinite detention, but that silence was broken the day South African President Cyril Ramaphosa stepped up and said, "Enough." A sharp, unfiltered message from Ramaphosa himself, demanding Nnamdi Kanu's immediate release, citing court rulings from both Kenya and Nigeria. The continued detention of Mr. Nnamdi Kanu violates the spirit of Pan-African justice. South Africa cannot stand idly while another African court ruling is trampled on by political interest. Kenya's High Court had already ruled Kanu was kidnapped, conditioned, detained illegally, but Abuja ignored it. Now, South Africa stepping in not just as a nation, but as Africa's second largest democracy. What future do we build if African rulings are ignored by African governments? Today it is Nnamdi Kanu, tomorrow it could be any one of us.
Of course.
Nigeria must act not for him, but for Africa. We can't afford a diplomatic war with Pretoria. But releasing Kanu will unleash political chaos at home. The choice was clear. But neither option was safe. South Africa's stance ignited global outrage. Diaspora groups rallied behind Ramaphosa, demanding Tinubu answer the call of justice. Kanu is not the crime, abduction is. Obey the law. Rumors spread of a quiet deal, one that could involve conditional release, strategic silence, or even a trade in diplomatic favor. Options are on the table: release Kanu and lose the political upper hand, or face full-blown continental isolation. As the sun will answer the call of justice. Kanu is not the crime, abduction is. Obey the law. Rumors spread of a quiet deal, one that could involve conditional release, strategic silence, or even a trade in diplomatic favors. But at what cost? As tensions rise, Tinubu convenes a late-night meeting. Options are on the table: release Kanu and lose the political upper hand, or face full-blown continental isolation. As the sun rose over Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu was already seated with his most trusted advisors. Ramaphosa's letter was no longer just paper, it was pressure. The first response wasn't diplomatic, it was legal. The Nigerian government, through its Justice Department, began crafting a position: Kanu's case is a domestic matter. Studio microphone narrator. Tinubu wasn't going to respond alone. Sources say calls were made across West Africa to leaders seen as neutral, asking for their patience or support. Within hours, the Nigerian media narrative shifted. Spokespersons emphasized national interest, the complexity of legal appeals, and subtly reminded the public of Nigeria's leadership in Africa. Despite diplomatic noise, the Department of State Services issued no statement. But insiders say the directive remained clear: maintain current detention protocols. African Union leadership received position papers from both sides. South Africa's argument cited judicial precedent. Nigeria's letter emphasized non-interference. The Union encourages dialogue, legal clarity, and adherence to established rulings from all member states. As heads of state debated legality, human rights groups reignited their message. The issue wasn't politics, it was due process. The question is simple: was Nnamdi Kanu given a fair trial? If not, why is he still in detention? Studio microphone narrator. Within Nigeria, not everyone agreed with the hard stance. Some lawmakers feared that international criticism could damage Nigeria's credibility at the next AU summit. We cannot be seen as ignoring rulings, especially when we expect others to respect ours. Days after the letter, Ramaphosa reportedly called President Tinubu directly. According to diplomatic aides, the tone was professional but firm. We respect South Africa's concern. But Nigeria answers to its own courts, not its neighbors. In just 2 weeks, African leaders will meet face to face. And Kanu's case, once confined to Nigerian courtrooms, now stands before an entire continent. The standoff has only just begun and the pressure is building. For months, the case of Nnamdi Kanu remained Nigeria's business. But now, in the heart of Africa's political capital, it was placed on the table before the entire continent. It is not our place to judge individual nations, but it is our duty to uphold the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. That duty compels us to act. For the first time since Kanu's detention, the AU acknowledged it publicly. It wasn't a condemnation, but it was pressure. One by one, African leaders were called into quiet consultations. Ramaphosa reaffirmed his position. Kenya's legal delegation presented its court ruling. Nigeria held firm, but its circle was shrinking. The High Court in Nairobi ruled this rendition violated our law. If we expect global respect, Africa must begin by respecting its own rulings. Yes. EW had seen the documents laid out in such detail. Some delegates were reportedly stunned. We respect the rule of law, but we must also respect sovereign processes. Nnamdi Kanu faces legal proceedings at home in accordance with Nigerian law. It was calm. It was firm. But to some, it sounded defensive. Perhaps it is time for an AU-appointed human rights observer to visit Mr. Kanu and report independently. The suggestion changed the tone of the room. Now it wasn't just about law, it was about access, accountability, and optics. Behind the firm stance was a growing realization Nigeria's approach would need to evolve or it would be defined for them. We do not seek to undermine Nigeria. But if rulings are ignored, we all risk instability. Let us find a path that respects justice and face no winners or losers. His tone had shifted. It wasn't confrontation now, it was leadership. The African Union proposed a resolution, an advisory review panel to evaluate the detention and recommendations for all sides. It wasn't binding, but it was historic. Where rulings have been issued, member states are encouraged to engage in good faith legal review and provide access to neutral monitors to assess compliance. The spotlight was now fixed, not just on a government, but on its choices, its image, and its commitment to the principles it helped write. Africa was no longer silent. But would Nigeria listen or dig deeper into isolation? As pressure mounted from the African Union, Nigeria's national security architecture began preparing for a scenario they once deemed impossible: Nnamdi Kanu walks free. At the core of the dilemma was a question: if the courts had spoken, both in Kenya and Nigeria, what legal framework justified continued detention? We need a position that acknowledges international concerns, but reaffirms sovereignty. We may propose a conditional review. Tinubu's advisors mapped out how different political blocs might respond. Would releasing Kanu spark support or criticism? Could it strengthen the opposition? If we time it near the next appeal ruling, we control the narrative. But if it looks like we bow to outside pressure, we lose public trust. In times of uncertainty, the Nigerian government often turns to the moral compass of the people, faith leaders, monarchs, and community elders. Peace must be preserved, but justice must not be politicized. Using internal polling and simulation models, government consultants played out how Nigerians would respond from celebration to confusion. Over 60% say if Kanu is freed after this long, they'll believe something was being hidden. We must manage perception. Though quiet publicly, the Nigerian armed forces also weighed in. The priority wasn't legal, it was national stability. After the AU's public remarks, other international observers took note. Diplomats began asking quiet but serious questions. Has the detention passed due process, or has it become indefinite without new charges? What's the timeline? In the final analysis, 3 options remain on the table. Maintain detention, delay further, citing national security. Conditional release, offer monitored freedom under court supervision. Full release, legal explanation, tied to Nigerian court judgment and call for reconciliation. This should not have taken international intervention. If a court ruled, the government should have followed. It's time to rebuild public trust. Opposition voices grew louder, not just on Kanu, but on the larger idea of constitutional consistency. As options narrowed, a new whisper emerged, a potential compromise, a conditional release reviewed by Nigerian courts under AU supervision. No victor, no defeat, just a way out. We are open to dialogue, but Nigeria will never be dictated to. Far from the courtrooms of Nigeria or the corridors of the African Union, one voice has continued to start tension from abroad, Simon Ekpa. Activist, commentator, and to many, a polarizing figure. Nnamdi Kanu is not the issue. The real problem is Nigeria refusing to recognize what the people have demanded. While diplomatic negotiations intensified, Ekpa led a growing digital campaign that positioned itself apart from the legal battle and even from Kanu's direct directives. Simon Ekpa's messaging appeals to anger, not strategy. And in doing so, he creates a new challenge, one that no government, or even Kanu himself, may fully control. Observers note that Ekpa's movement, often more hardline in tone, doesn't always align with Kanu's legal counsel or even the family's public statements. We urge restraint and unity. The legal process must be respected. No external actors speak for our client. Back in Abuja, Ekpa's digital broadcasts were closely monitored. Officials feared they could confuse the public and be misinterpreted as directives from Kanu himself. The problem is misattribution. People think Kanu is still directing actions. That muddies negotiations. Even in the diaspora, the movement had fractured. Some backed Kanu's legal path. Others viewed Ekpa's calls for action as the true representation of the struggle. We want peace, but peace must come with truth. If Kanu is silenced, who will speak? Finnish authorities, pressed by Nigerian diplomatic channels, issued careful statements. They reminded the world that freedom of expression is protected, but it doesn't shield incitement. We continue to monitor reports of activity linked to Mr. Ekpa. We urge all voices to act within the bounds of law. We are mediating a case based on rulings. But we must acknowledge how non-state actors, including foreign nationals, are complicating the dialogue. For the African Union, Ekpa was never the main subject. But his growing voice risked disrupting the fragile consensus forming around Kanu's legal case. We are grateful for the growing concern across Africa. But let it be clear, only Nnamdi Kanu speaks for himself, and he has not endorsed any actions taken in his name without consent. It was a message aimed not just at governments, but at those who claim to carry the torch. This fracture helps us. If we delay just enough, international observers may begin to question who's really speaking for whom. Within power circles, the splintering narrative was seen as leverage. The more divided the voices, the less unified the demand. The African Union, once confident of building consensus, now struggled. Internal documents reveal hesitation, fueled by unclear messaging and fears of triggering unintended consequences. Recommend postponement of observer deployment until primary representative of affected group is confirmed. The question is no longer just about justice, it's about clarity. And in the noise, even truth may be lost. As the Nigerian government stalls, the patience of South Africa runs thin. President Tobo Molango, no longer mincing words, moves toward a path no one expected, a demand for sanctions, and a historic continental showdown. Africa cannot afford to ignore the erosion of justice. If the rulings from Kenya and Nigeria's own courts are disregarded, we risk setting a dangerous precedent. South Africa will act. And we call on the African Union to do the same. In Abuja, the tone shifts. A senior official in Nigeria's foreign ministry is recorded in a closed-door meeting. But the world is listening and the pressure grows louder. Is South Africa overstepping its bounds or stepping up for human rights? This isn't interference. This is solidarity. It's diplomacy, yes, but it's also a warning. Nigeria is risking its regional alliances. African Union leaders convene. On the table, South Africa's proposal for diplomatic penalties if Nigeria fails to comply with the court rulings within 60 days. This cannot be ignored. The credibility of our continental courts is at stake. Yet at the DSS headquarters, where Nnamdi remains held, little has changed. His lawyers continue to press, but access is limited. The silence from Oso Rock is now a statement in itself. We have not been allowed to see him. The rulings are being ignored. We are considering international legal remedies. We are not just fighting for Kanu. We are fighting for African justice. Even the United States weighs in. A reporter questions the State Department about South Africa's threat of sanctions. Is the US concerned about escalating tensions between Nigeria and South Africa? We encourage all parties to uphold judicial independence and protect human rights. We are monitoring developments closely. If South Africa pushes for sanctions and AU compliance, Nigeria could face diplomatic isolation. That means trade, investment, travel, all at risk. The cost of ignoring court orders could be higher than the Nigerian government anticipated. This isn't just about one man. If we back down now, what happens when it's one of us next? You're asking us to confront Abuja directly. I'm asking you to defend African justice.
Ngwano, dalo nene no, umunnem, dikun sinesera ni bo media. Gini kunu wali ikwu na nkawa nke unu. Gbasta maka ihe nọ n'iru akwụkwọ n'ụbọchị uhuruchi nke taa. Gwa ya ife iche n'ụdị nke gị. Deela ya n'akara kọmentị ka mara ihe i chere. Ma chetakwa tụsa ya bụ ozi ka o were tụ ụmụnne anyị ndị ọzọ ntị. Ndewo na ụmụnne m ka emesịa nụ.